The first black president of the United States walked into the White House with both triumph and burden upon his shoulders. Barack Obama understood that every step he took, every word he spoke, every decision he made would be weighed not only as his own but as a measure of what black leadership could represent in America. The Oval Office, built by enslaved hands, now held a man whose very existence challenged centuries of exclusion. For many, his presidency was a dream realized. For others, it was a nightmare they had vowed to prevent. And so, from the very first day, Barack Obama carried both the pride of his people and the fury of his opponents. He entered office at a time of crisis. The economy was crumbling, banks collapsing, homes being lost. Families across the nation lived in fear of unemployment and hunger. In those early months, Obama faced the impossible task of restoring stability while carrying the expectations of millions who believed he could heal not just the economy, but the wounds of race, division, and injustice. He was calm where others were panicked, deliberate where others demanded haste. His steady leadership pulled America back from the edge, but he knew the storms he faced were not only financial. They were moral. They were historic. For Black America, his election was both joy and weight. Every insult hurled at him, every cartoon dripping with racism, every whispered doubt about his birthplace or faith. These were not attacks on one man. They were reminders that racism was alive, furious and unwilling to surrender its grip. Obama did not respond with rage. He responded with dignity. He knew that his greatest weapon against hatred was composure. That composure was not weakness. It was strategy. It showed the world that dignity could stand taller than prejudice. And yet, dignity does not erase pain. As president, Obama witnessed the heartbreak of black lives cut short. He watched as names like Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and so many others became rallying cries against police brutality. He understood the grief, the fury, the generations of mistrust behind the chants of Black Lives Matter. Some accused him of not doing enough. Others accused him of doing too much. But through it all, he reminded the nation that justice was not optional. It was the foundation of democracy. In his speeches, he did not simply speak policy. He spoke to the conscience of America, urging it to remember the humanity of those it too easily discarded. But Obama's presidency was not only defined by struggle, it was also defined by progress. His signature healthcare reform, the Affordable Care Act, extended coverage to millions who had lived without it. For poor families, for working mothers, for children long denied access to care, it was more than legislation. It was life. He pushed for education reform, for environmental protection, for marriage equality. He spoke not just as a politician, but as a father, as a husband, as a man who knew that the true measure of leadership is not how much power you hold, but how much dignity you extend to those with the least. Still, his every step was shadowed by opposition. There were those who vowed to block him at every turn, not simply for policy, but because of who he was. The resistance was fierce, sometimes cruel. The birther conspiracy questioned whether a man with brown skin and a foreign name could truly belong in America's highest office. It was humiliation disguised as debate, racism clothed in political language. Yet through it all, Obama walked with composure, knowing that to stumble would be to confirm the lies of his detractors. His calm was not passivity, it was defiance. History will remember the night he stood before the nation after Osama bin Laden was killed, not with arrogance but with quiet acknowledgement of justice served. It will remember the tears in his eyes when he sang Amazing Grace at the funeral of Reverend Clementa Pinckney, slain in the Charleston church massacre. It will remember his speeches, not as mere words, but as anchors of hope in storms, of division. Barack Obama did not transform America overnight. He could not undo centuries of injustice in 8 years, but he planted seeds of possibility, of pride, of belief, that continue to grow. For young black children, his face in the White House changed everything. A boy who once doubted whether his dark skin was a limitation could now point to the television and say, "The president looks like me." A girl whose ancestors had been denied the right to vote could now dream of the highest office without hesitation. Representation is not a luxury, it is power. And Barack Obama's presidency gave that power to a generation. Yet he was never blind to the reality. He knew that his election did not erase racism, but instead revealed it more clearly. The backlash was fierce. A rise in hate crimes, a surge in white nationalism, a political polarization sharper than ever. His very existence had forced America to confront its contradictions. For some, that confrontation was liberation. For others, it was unbearable. Obama bore the weight of both reactions with the same steady grace. He often said that progress is not a straight line, it is a winding path, full of steps forward and steps back. His presidency embodied that truth. When his time in office ended in 2017, the tears were not only for farewell, but for what his departure symbolized. People wondered if the hope he inspired could survive the storms that followed. But Barack himself never claimed to be a savior. He always reminded the nation that democracy was not about one man, but about the people. His message was clear. Leaders come and go, but the fight for justice, dignity, and equality belongs to every generation. In his post-presidency, Barack Obama has continued to carry the same mission. He writes, he speaks, he mentors. He and Michelle devote themselves to building opportunities for young people, especially those from communities too often overlooked. His foundation invests in leadership, in civic engagement, in voices that might one day echo his own. He remains a symbol, yes, but, more importantly, he remains a servant. That perhaps is his greatest lesson. True power is not measured by how high you rise, but by how many you lift as you climb. For Black America, Barack Obama's story is not perfection, nor is it a fairy tale. It is more profound than that. It is proof. Proof that centuries of struggle were not in vain. Proof that dignity can withstand the weight of hatred. Proof that possibility can emerge from pain. His life does not erase injustice, but it makes denial impossible. When he stood with his hand on the Bible and swore the oath of office, he carried within him the voices of generations who had dreamed of freedom but never lived to see it. And though the work remains unfinished, his presidency carved a permanent mark on the stone of history. We were here. We led. We mattered. Barack Obama's journey is not just his own. It belongs to every child who doubts their worth, to every parent who sacrifices for their family, to every dreamer who refuses to accept the world as it is. It belongs to the enslaved who prayed in secret fields, to the marchers who faced billy clubs on Selma's Bridge, to the mothers who buried sons and demanded justice. His story is theirs. His voice is theirs. His hope is theirs. And so, when history tells of Barack Obama, it will not speak only of one man. It will speak of a movement, a people, of faith in what America could be. It will speak of justice still unfinished, of dignity still demanded, of courage still required. It will remind us that though the road is long and the night often dark, there are moments, precious and rare, when the light breaks through. Barack Obama was one such moment, and because of him, millions believe that more moments are still to come. From the beginning, Barack Obama's life was never just his own story. It was the story of a people who had endured centuries of struggle, resilience, and quiet faith in a brighter tomorrow. To speak his name is to summon a journey that stretches far beyond one man, reaching back to the pain of shackles and forward to the hope of a new generation. His rise was not an accident, nor a miracle. It was the product of determination, of heritage, of courage sharpened by injustice, and of a belief that dignity could be demanded, not begged for. He was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, in 1961. His father a man from Kenya, his mother a woman from Kansas. Two very different worlds, two distinct histories, stitched together in the birth of a child who would one day carry the weight of an entire nation's contradictions. To be of mixed race in America was never simple. He carried within him the echoes of both sides of America's promise, the immigrant's dream and the burden of race. But his childhood was not gilded. His father left early, and Obama was raised by his mother and grandparents, learning from them both the values of perseverance and the sting of absence. He grew up questioning who he was, searching in books, in classrooms and on basketball courts for the answer to a question larger than himself: where do I belong? That search brought him into contact with the reality every black man in America must face: the tension between how he sees himself and how society sees him. Barack spoke often about the first time he felt the sharp cut of discrimination, the sidelong glance from a store clerk, the unspoken suspicion in the eyes of a woman clutching her purse, the realization that no matter how polite, how educated, how careful, he would always carry the mark of being different. These small humiliations are not small at all. They are reminders carved into the daily life of Black Americans of how society values or devalues them. And yet, those moments did not define him. Instead, they sharpened his awareness. They planted in him a fire to answer indignity not with bitterness but with purpose. As a young man, Barack left Hawaii and traveled to Los Angeles, then New York, and finally Chicago. Each city shaped him. Each place added a layer of complexity to his identity. But Chicago was where he truly found his calling. Among the worn-down neighborhoods of the South Side, where factories had closed and hope seemed scarce, Barack stepped into the role of a community organizer. He was still young, still untested, but he understood something vital: that leadership was not about titles or applause. It was about listening. It was about standing shoulder to shoulder with people whose voices had long been ignored. He sat at kitchen tables with mothers worried about their children's safety. He walked into churches filled with men and women who had lived through segregation and seen promises broken. He helped ordinary people fight for jobs, better schools, cleaner streets. And through those years, he discovered what truly mattered. Dignity was not given by governments or politicians. It was claimed, nurtured, and defended by people who refused to bow to despair. But even as he worked, Barack struggled within himself. He wrestled with anger at a system that stacked the deck against Black families, anger at the deep divisions that scarred America. And he wondered whether one man could ever make enough difference to matter. He once admitted that he asked himself whether he was just a dreamer, destined to burn out like so many before him. Yet it was that struggle, that wrestling with his own doubt, that made him human, and that humanity would one day help millions believe in him. Education became his weapon. Harvard Law School was a place few Black men entered and fewer still commanded. But Barack did more than succeed. He broke barriers, becoming the first Black president of the Harvard Law Review. That moment was not just personal triumph. It was a symbol. For centuries, America had tried to erase Black intellect, to deny Black ambition, to treat Black excellence as anomaly. Barack's election at Harvard shouted a truth that could no longer be ignored. Intelligence has no color, and leadership is not bound by skin. For young Black students watching, his victory whispered, "If he can, maybe I can too." After Harvard, Barack could have chosen a path of wealth and prestige. Law firms would have lined up to welcome him. But he chose something different. He returned to Chicago, to teach, to serve, to build. It was a decision that revealed his character: service over self, people over profit. It was in those years that he met Michelle Robinson, a woman of strength, grace, and brilliance. Together, they became not only partners in life, but partners in a mission. Their love story was rooted not in extravagance but in shared values. Two Black professionals who believed their lives could mean more than comfort, who believed that love itself was an act of resistance against a world that often told Black families they could not endure. Barack's entry into politics was not without scars. The path was harsh, filled with skeptics and setbacks. He lost his first run for Congress. He faced criticism from those who doubted whether America would ever accept a Black leader in its highest offices. But each defeat became fuel. Each rejection became proof that perseverance mattered more than applause. Slowly, his words began to reach beyond the South Side of Chicago. He spoke not just of policy, but of possibility. He talked about an America that did not yet exist, but could. an America where the color of a child's skin would not decide the weight of their future. The breakthrough came in 2004, when he stood before the Democratic National Convention and delivered a speech that electrified the nation. He spoke not as a politician bound by party lines, but as a storyteller carrying the voices of millions. There's not a Black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America, he declared. Those words cut through cynicism like a blade. They reminded people that hope was not naive. Hope was revolutionary. For many Black families, hearing those words from a man who looked like them was transformative. It was as though the long night of history had flickered, just for a moment, with light. That light carried Barack Obama into the most daring chapter of his life, the decision to run for President of the United States. It was an audacious dream. No Black man had ever held the office. For centuries, the presidency had been the image of white authority, a fortress seemingly impenetrable. And yet, Barack dared to believe it was possible. His campaign was not just political, it was spiritual, emotional, generational. It was fueled by the voices of young people who had never voted before, by elders who had marched with Martin Luther King Jr., by single mothers who saw in him the possibility that their children's lives could be different. The road was grueling. The attacks were sharp, the doubts were constant. But step by step, speech by speech, vote by vote, the tide began to shift. America, weary of division, weary of war, weary of broken promises, began to listen. And in Barack Obama, they heard not perfection, but conviction. They heard not a savior, but a servant who believed in them. The night of November 4, 2008, will forever be etched into the memory of the nation. Crowds filled the streets of Chicago. Tears rolled down the faces of men and women who had lived long enough to remember signs that said, "Whites only." In that moment, the impossible had been shattered. Barack Obama, son of a Kenyan father and a Kansas mother, became the 44th President of the United States. For millions of Black Americans, it was more than an election. It was vindication. The ancestors who had dreamed of freedom but died in chains were honored in that victory. The voices silenced by lynching, the bodies beaten on Selma's bridge, the children barred from schools, all of them stood in spirit beside him that night. And yet Barack himself knew the truth. His election was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a harder one, because the very forces that had resisted Black dignity for centuries would not vanish with a ballot. They would fight back, fiercer than ever. But on that night, for one fleeting moment, joy drowned out fear. And America, however briefly, saw itself as it could be.